Hello everybody, thanks for coming. I must admit I had visions of being here on my own just talking to a wall, so it's great to see so many people here. My name's Andy Church, I'm Director of Ultra Soil Solutions Limited, former head groundsman and greenkeeper, and today I want to give you a quick history of gypsum and just run through what we're doing with products and the benefits that you can get from them both in golf, football and rugby. So gypsum, it's been around for many, many years. I can remember my first job as an assistant greenkeeper was going out with a barrel load of lime and spreading it with a shovel over greens. So, you know, it's been around for many, many years and the benefits have been well known. As a fertiliser value in Europe, it was used extensively during the last half of the 18th century. And the main reason being men working with plaster of Paris were finding that at the end of the day they went out and shook their clothes off and the grass where they were shaking their clothes off was growing and they started to get their heads around the fact that there was a fertiliser value to the product, and then extensive use in Europe during the 18th century. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about gypsum? I've seen lots and lots of different descriptions online in the chat rooms. What is gypsum and what's it made up of? We're talking about calcium and sulphur, so calcium sulphate. As I say, I've heard gypsum described as a calcium carbonate, all sorts of different weird and wonderful concoctions. We're dealing with a calcium sulphate. Traditional spreading, and this would mainly be in agriculture, but traditional spreading of gypsum would be with pieces of kit like this. Obviously no use to man nor beast in our industry. You couldn't go running around on a golf course with a piece of kit like that. The benefits are obviously there, but you're going to make a hell of a mess. So we've moved on a long way and we're now able to supply gypsums in a liquid form and use pieces of kit like this. This is a black multi-spray, as it says. And basically we were finding that a lot of our customers that were using gypsum in a liquid form were going out and sorrel rolling first. And the clever dudes at Black said, well, hang on a minute, we'll make a machine that does it all in one. So, a bit of advertising for them. They have this sprayer with the sorrel roller on the front. You've got the brush attachment in the middle and a rake at the back, and obviously the sprayer doing its job. So that's actually spraying liquid gypsum on a football pitch. Tottenham Hotspur, if you want to be specific. So, when we're talking about liquid gypsums and liquid limes, just to bring you fully up to speed with what we've got liquid gypsum, which we call GYP-FLO. It's a calcium sulphate in a liquid form, so you're taking the benefits of gypsum, the calcium sulphate, and putting it into a liquid that you guys in this room can use. I don't suppose any of you would want to go out and spread a gypsum in a powdered form. So as I say, we have it in a liquid form where you can put it in your sprayer and spray it as you would with most other products that you're using through the sprayer. And liquid lime, calcium carbonate, which is called pH+. The clue's in the name. It will address any low pHs and it will lift your pH, as opposed to GYP-FLO that won't. It's pH neutral in its activity in the ground. We are the sole distributors for these products in the UK and Europe. We import them from Australia. So what, I hear you say? Well, the benefits to greenkeepers, as I say, it's been well known what gypsum and lime can do to the soil and the fertiliser benefits that it has, but what are the benefits to greenkeepers? And I'm assuming that most of you in here are in greenkeeping. Reduced application of wetting agents. I'm certainly not slagging off wetting agents or making any derogatory terms towards wetting agents, but we are finding that a lot of our customers are coming to us and saying, look, we've got this problem, Andy, we've got really wet greens in the top 50, 75 mil, and underneath that it's dry. We're putting on lots of wetting agents to try and solve the problem. But they're doing that on a monthly basis and they're spending a lot of money on wetting agents and don't appear to be curing the problem. So in using gypsum, we're enabling them to not use as much on the wetting agent side. Our customers are seeing increased effectiveness and reduced application rates of nutrients. As I say, just about every customer that phones me He's saying that I'm piling on nutrients, I'm piling on fertiliser, and I can see a benefit, but it doesn't last very long, and I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that I'm putting on isn't actually getting used by the soil. We're seeing increased drought resistance. We're allowing the soil, if you like, to manage the moisture that's in it on its own. So we're freeing up that soil, cleaning that soil, and enabling it to hang on to the moisture that it's able to get, instead of it just disappearing through hydrophobic soil, which again is what the wetting agent should be there to cure for you. We're seeing an even distribution of moisture through the profile. As I said, most of the customers that phone me that have greens that they want to treat, they're seeing a really wet layer on the top of the greens, a perfectly good drainage layer at the bottom, but the moisture just simply can't get to that to the drainage. So we're seeing high moisture levels in the top, and then underneath that almost bone dry. So the moisture's there, but it just can't get through the profile. And we'll go on to the reasons, some of the reasons why we think that is later on. But calcium sulphate, gypsum and lime in particular, will flocculate the soils. We all know that's what they do. They're also, we're seeing flocculating bacteria. So we're seeing big build-ups in layers through the profile of either anaerobic soil or ion clogging, which are obviously full of bacteria, and we're enabling that to be flocculated and distributed through the profile. All of those in conjunction give you a healthier sward. It's very common 2 or 3 days after application sometimes we're getting comments back saying, look, the grass looks healthier already. Increased density of growth, again that goes hand in hand with what we're doing. And the strengthening of the plant cells through increased calcium uptake. I think it's well documented that that's what calcium will do. It is very good at repairing damaged cells. And what we're looking for in this industry is obviously to hammer the greens to death. There's lots of people walking over them, playing golf, etc. You are damaging the cells of those plants. The increased calcium uptake is repairing that damage. Greater disease resistance, and again it goes hand in hand. If you've got a stronger plant, a healthier plant, you are going to get greater disease resistance. We're seeing customers reporting back typical savings of around £1,200 per year. This is taken from one specific site, and I'll mention a bit more about it later. But he's found that he can reduce his nutrient applications. He has more or less eradicated any wetting agents that he has to use, and he's now got greens that he can work on even if it's been really wet. The moisture is being able to be managed by the soil rather than just laying in that top 50, 75 mil. Having decided that calcium sulphate or carbonate, whatever you're going to use, is beneficial to your plant and wanting to use it, selecting the right calcium product is very important. You have to evaluate the measures in order to make the right choice based on the value for money. We all know pennies are short, and whatever you're going to put down, you need to see a good result from. Bang for the buck, if you like. So what should you look for when you're choosing a calcium product? In gypsum, look at purity, and when I say this, really comparing it against pelletized or powdered gypsum as opposed to the liquid gypsum that we're using. So have a look at the purity, i.e. what is actually in it, the calcium and the sulphur percentage. You'll be amazed at some of the products that I see claiming to be a calcium product, and you'll find that the calcium percentage in there is minimal. It says that it's got calcium in it, and it might have a little bit of calcium in it, but it's really important that you assess the percentages. Low calcium, obviously, you're not putting a lot on. And particle size. Very, very important in any product that you put down that you get the particle size right, and I'll come on to that again in a tick. Lime, same thing, purity, effective neutralising value, EMV, the calcium percentage, and the particle size. When you're evaluating the particle size, the finer the particle, the better. And again, we'll come on to it again in a minute, but you have to really look at the particle size of the product that you're putting down. The smaller the particle size, the finer the particle size, the more effect and the more reactive value you're going to get in the soil, more bang for your buck again. Quick diagram, looking at surface area. The effective neutralising value of lime is the ability of the unit of mass of lime to change soil pH. And here we're talking about lime calcium carbonate. The chemical composition, or the NV, the particle size distribution, and that's by percentage and by weight, and the solubility of lime. As particle size increases, the amount that portion of lime can neutralise decreases. Lime particles over 0.5 mil are only 50% as effective as smaller lime particles in increasing pH. When we started mucking around with these products and taking them to market, I must be honest, it took me, I was sitting there scratching my head and saying, well, how can a finer particle have a greater surface area? And as I say, that diagram basically explains that, and a simple diagram is what helped me understand it. So just looking at a case study here, Harborne Golf Club in Birmingham, beautiful golf club, but they were experiencing problems with their greens. And again, you know, the 50 mil at the top, absolutely saturated. Minimal rain would render the greens more or less unplayable or very, very wet. So the symptoms, as I've said, was the moisture retention in the top 50 mil. He literally couldn't walk on the greens without leaving quite a footprint after rain. He was experiencing nutrient lock-up, so he was finding that he was putting on lots of nutrient, weren't necessarily getting much out of those nutrients, and they did seem to disappear quite quickly. He was seeing an anaerobic layer forming, and I think that probably every greenkeeper's been used to an anaerobic layer at some stage, and that anaerobic layer would be around the 50 millimetre mark where the moisture was just gathering and causing that black smelly layer. There was evidence of iron clogging, i.e. around the 50 mil mark there was an orange layer forming, and it was basically iron just sitting in that profile and preventing moisture, nutrients, roots, anything from going any lower. And it was evidence that the problem was growing. Reiterated this a couple of times, but below that 50 mil, he had dry soil. All the moisture was sitting in the top 50 mil, and it was going that way rather than down. So the conclusion, what did we do for the guys there? We applied GYP-FLO liquid gypsum at an application rate of 50 litres a hectare. And I think fairly commonly he was around a hectare for his 18 greens, so he treated all 18 greens. Quite quickly he had an even distribution of moisture through the profile. I remember one instance on a Monday morning, him phoning me and saying, Andy, look, we've had hellish rain over the weekend and I was expecting to come in and not be able to do a lot to my greens. He said, and they're dry. I can see it's been raining and yes, they're wet, but I can walk on them and I'm out there hand cutting. So the flocculation effect of the GYP-FLO, the liquid gypsum, had helped already break up some of the layers that were inhibiting that moisture moving through the profile. He was already seeing an increased effectiveness in nutrient application. He's now able to put down roughly a third of the nutrients that he was putting down, fertilisers, to get the same effect. And again, it was basically because having applied the GYP-FLO, liquid gypsum, the soil was then able to get those nutrients to where the plant could use it rather than it being locked up in the mire of the iron clogging and the black layer. So the plant was able to get at those nutrients rather than them sit in the soil and not be available to the plant. We very quickly started to notice when we profiled the greens that the black layer was breaking up and starting to disperse through the profile, and the iron clogging layer was doing exactly the same. As I said, his greens are now playable even after heavy rain, and he can get on and work those greens. It saved him a hell of a lot of time, a hell of a lot of money, and as he said, you know, there would be days coming in after heavy rain where he literally wouldn't be able to touch those greens. he's now able to plan ahead and work on those greens even after heavy rain and get done the work that he needs to get done. And this is where the estimated saving of £1,200 comes from. Jim has sat down and worked out the saving, and that is on the, as I said before, reduced applications of wetting agents. He's finding that the nutrients that he's putting on, he's getting more out of. So, GYP-FLO, liquid gypsum. It's got 35% calcium. If you look at most typical natural gypsum products, they're typically around 23% calcium. That's actually quite high. You can get them down as low as 15 to 18, but I've been kind to it. In GYP-FLO liquid gypsum, we've got 25% sulphur. In natural gypsum, I say typically around 18%. And again, I've been kind to it, they can go a fair bit lower than that. We've got an average particle size of 5 microns. Natural gypsum is 1,000 microns. With pelletized gypsum or natural gypsum, you can literally wait months for that to start to take effect in the soil. In agriculture, you turn those fields in once you'd applied gypsum. Obviously, we can't do that in our industry. So we're taking a product that is very, very fine in its particle size, and it can move into the soil very, very quickly. So it can get into the cavities in the spaces in between the soil and do its job. If you were to put gypsum down, as I say, typically around 9 months before you're starting to see a benefit to the soil. Typically, you're looking at over 2 years. With this product, you're getting a benefit from the application immediately. It starts to work on the soil immediately because it is so fine. It can be applied via irrigation if you have an irrigation that can handle amendments going into it, or conventional sprayer. Most of our customers will just simply tank mix in the conventional sprayer and go out and spray. And they're able to do that with other products, so they can put on a fungicide application at the same time, so you can mix it with GYP-FLO. It's a 5-to-1 mix, so you're mixing it in with water because it's a very thick product, and mix it 5 to 1, put it in the sprayer, and away you go. As I've touched on, it's readily available to the soil, to the plant, so it works very, very quickly. As soon as it hits the soil, it is doing its job. Some of the product will be taken up by the leaf, so you're immediately getting a hit of calcium into the leaf, as well as looking at amending the soil. A few pictures of what we mean by iron clogging. This was not at Harborne, this was another golf course that I won't mention. But basically, we've taken a core out of the green there, and this is around 50 mil. I had a knife with me, and you could literally tap that soil, and it was like metal against metal. There were iron deposits forming, and it was a literal break. Once you took that hole out, it literally broke in half at around 50 mil. There were no roots penetrating through that layer, and beneath that layer, it was bone dry. So the iron literally clogged that soil up, and so if you took the profile across the whole green, it literally had an orange layer right the way through the middle of it, as if somebody had laid down a sheet of metal 10 years ago and it gradually rusted away. That's got squidged up a bit on the screen, but this is the same profile taken about 4 or 5 weeks later, and basically you couldn't break that whole core. The iron clogging had started to disperse through the soil. There was no clear line. You could literally see there where it had broken up and started to move down the profile. His greens were a hell of a lot drier as well, so there was moisture moving through the profile and busting through that layer at around 50 mil. You could start to see roots just penetrating through. We broke this open at about where we thought the iron clogging layer was, and we could start to see roots penetrating through. And it was void of roots before we got involved in it. I was back there just around Christmas, and again, the greens are looking a lot healthier, and the moisture is moving evenly through the profile. So we've been talking about iron clogging layer. This was a golf course that was at just before Christmas, and you can see there, again, around the 50 mil mark, 50, 75 mil mark, the iron clogging layer starting to form. And it is just a sheer layer of iron building up in the soil, and it's causing a barrier. There are no roots going through it. You can see just above the iron clog layer there, the black layer starting to form, and that is purely because moisture isn't moving any further than that layer. The iron clog is literally holding that moisture in the top 50 mil. This is a sports pitch, a rugby pitch. A contractor had gone in a couple of years ago and basically removed all the topsoil from site before he started construction. It wasn't identified by the client, and they ended up making 2 rugby pitches out of pure clay. Couldn't get any grass to grow, couldn't get any water to go through it. The slightest spot of rain and it was waterlogged. We actually went in and applied 200 litres of GYP-FLO per hectare. And now, as you can see from that profile, you drag a profile out and it literally breaks up in your hand. So we've flocculated the clay for him. His root growth is a lot better. The moisture going through is greatly improved. He can now play those pitches again even after heavy rain. And that was a picture taken just before Christmas. The grass growth is phenomenal, and it was very hard to spot grass on there a couple of years ago before we started getting involved. I just wanted to show you this picture. That I basically took a profile on the same greens where I was looking at the iron clogging layer, and I was lucky enough to hit an old vertidrain hole. When I talk about iron clogging layer or oxidisation, you can see here that there's sand there that was brushed into the old vertidrain hole, and around the outside of the vertidrain hole you can just see a very thin orange layer forming, and again that's an iron clogging layer, oxidisation of that water that's going in there. And that's basically forming a coating, if you like, around the outside of that spike hole and turning it into a pond. The moisture was basically gathering in that vertidrain hole. I thought that was A, lucky to hit that when I was doing a profile, and B, worth showing you guys. This is the Oaks Golf Club. Again, spraying wetting agents through the summer, and finding that they were still getting a hell of a lot of dry patch. Most of the water that they were putting on was simply running off because it was so dry. We went in and applied some GYP-FLO. We applied shortly after the 20th of the 6th, 14, and you can see here on the 15th of the 7th, we went back. He'd stopped using any wetting agents, which I asked him to do, just to confirm that the GYP-FLO, the calcium sulphate, was doing its job. And you can see there that the area started to green up. The moisture was now again evenly distributed through the profile, and grass cover was starting to come back. And that's all he'd done differently, was applied the liquid gypsum. And the soil was now able to manage the moisture that it was getting rather than it just running off. Still obviously a lot of work to do there, but a great improvement. Same golf club, hadn't intended to treat their tees, but the tee on the right there basically is just as you go into the sheds. So he treated all of his greens and treated them a couple of times, and whenever he came back, if there was a little bit left in the tank, he would get rid of it on this tee. These aren't the same tee, they're 2 tees about 30 metres apart. One hadn't had any GYP-FLO, and one, as I say, was the area that he was emptying his tank after applying GYP-FLO on his greens. And you can see the difference in grass growth. And again, that was simply because the calcium sulphate was flocculating that soil and allowing the soil to manage the moisture that was available to it, rather than it just running off. Another golf club, Bearsted, down in Kent, old-fashioned construction. Basically all of their approaches are where the clay was pushed up when they originally constructed the course. Their approaches, as I say, are made up of the clay that they were pushing around. So it meant that this time of the year he literally had to rope off all of his approaches because they were just sodden. couldn't walk on them without leaving a footprint. He's now applied GYP-FLO and does so on a regular basis, and the soil moisture content is even right the way through the profile, again consistent with what we see wherever else we use the product. Now it doesn't have to rope those areas off and can use the golf course as it's meant to. This is actually a video, and can't actually get it going, but again, it's the black multi-spray. As I said before, we were having a lot of our customers were going out and sorrel rolling before they put the product down. You don't need to, it's not essential, but it can help because you are getting that product straight into the soil where it's needed. And this is a football pitch where they're out sorrel rolling first, as I say, in the combined machine of the black multi-spray, and spraying gypsum on afterwards. This is the Oaks Golf Club that I was just talking to you about. He'd basically been away for a few days, and the guy that was left in charge hadn't noticed that the irrigation system was now not functioning. And he came back to several greens looking really brown and dying. But he noticed that a couple of the greens where he'd put a double application of GYP-FLO on were handling that situation a lot better than the others. And as I reiterate, it's simply because we were allowing the moisture that was there to be used by the soil rather than it not be able to get hold of it. You ended up with really hydrophobic soil on the greens that had only had one application because it was a work in progress, whereas the double application greens were handling the situation of drought a lot better. That's the end of what I've got to show you. If there are any questions, please do fire them away, or come onto our stand. We're on A31. If anybody wants any more information, we've got loads of graphics there and lots of information to back up what we've been saying. A31. A31.
Andy, on your example of Harvard,
yep.
What was the frequency of application, and was that done at the same time as the irrigation program?
Yes, it was. It wasn't a case of. Let me just get back to it, Lawrence, if I can. That's very irrelevant, isn't it? But yeah, no, he had one application of GYP-FLO at 40 litres, 50 litres a hectare, I beg your pardon, and he was doing that in conjunction with spiking. He'd actually applied it just before his autumn program, and he was looking at his greens, and he was unable to get on and start his autumn program because they were so wet. He put the GYP-FLO down, and as I say, dried it out sufficiently that he was then able to get on and undertake his autumn program, so spike and his top dressing. Any other questions? Thanks for listening, and as I say, if anybody wants any more information, please do come along. A31, we're there all this week. Be more than happy to answer any questions you've got. Thank you.